Can I record, edit, and upload a video in less than an hour? That's what we're going to find out. Welcome to the show. My name is Matthew Colville. I have long wanted to do much shorter videos, as those of you who've been following my channel since the beginning know, but we went longer and longer. But this is an opportunity. There's a lot of stuff I want to talk about, lots of new D&D content coming, but they are working on my house right now. And as a result, I have to get up super early in the morning and let them in, and it's just a huge pain in the butt. My life is somewhat disrupted, so a lot of the stuff I want to do a campaign diary, but that campaign diary is going to cover a lot. And as a result, it's going to be long. I want to continue the politics series. I want to do all that stuff. In fact, I think I have a very useful video coming up. I wanted to take, as you all know, Lost Mine of Phandelver and show you how I would prep it. Seemed appropriate since it is the adventure in the starter set. However, I am going to be playing in Lost Mine of Phandelver, and I do not want to spoil the experience for myself, so I thought I would take another adventure and go over how I would prep this adventure, and just to give you an idea of my process. I think that'll be incredibly useful for new dungeon masters, but that's not this video. This video is intended to be a very short video based on an idea I had while I was watching Critical Role recently. I've been watching a lot of Critical Role, and for various reasons. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll put a link in the doobly-doo. And I was listening to an interview with Liam O'Brien. Liam O'Brien is a voice actor. He's voiced a lot of characters in video games that you know and are familiar with. He is also a friend of mine, and he became my friend because he is also a voice director, and I believe that his voice direction saved my dialogue in Evolve, for which I will be eternally grateful. And I was listening to an interview with Liam about Critical Role, the Dragon Talk, the official Wizards of the Coast D&D podcast. Liam and Laura Bailey were on the show, and I was just thinking about why Liam likes playing in Matt Mercer's game. So I know Liam really well. I've now watched a lot of Critical Role. I feel like I understand that show pretty well. And I started to wonder, would Liam enjoy playing in my game? And I'm not sure. It wasn't obvious to me that the answer was yes. It's rarely obvious to me that the answer is yes when I wonder things like that, because I just don't take that kind of stuff for granted. I think there's a fallacy that, especially if you're a dungeon master, you imagine that the people that you like, if you run D&D and ask them to play, they would have a good time. But that's often true, but there's no reason it should be true, right? Whether we like playing like the game that you run is idiosyncratic. It's unique to you, and it might be very different than the next game you run. So it's entirely possible that somebody that you really like, and who you might enjoy playing D&D within some other campaign, they won't enjoy this game that you're running. So I started thinking about whether Liam would like playing in my game, and I don't know the answer. Spoilers, I didn't come up with an answer, but it did make me think about the difference between Matt Mercer's game and my game. And I have had people, back when we were live streaming my game, which we may do again, stay tuned. And there was a brief period where you could watch Critical Role, you could watch Matt Mercer's game and Matt Colville's game at the same time. And many people did this, and they compared and contrasted the two games. And at the time, I found that exercise somewhat distasteful, just because Matt is my friend, and the idea of comparing the two, and people would say in chat which one they liked better. And I was like, it's not a competition, this isn't a sport. I think our culture is somewhat sports mad, somewhat obsessed with who the winner is and who the loser is. And so I was like, what are you talking about? Like, this is crazy. And so I spent a lot of my time answering questions saying, there isn't really, like, I could run a game like he runs, he could run a game like I run. We're both tailoring our content to our audience, our players. But having watched now a lot more Critical Role, I thought, I think there is a significant difference between Critical Role, the game Matt Mercer's running, and the game I'm running. And it reminded me of an essay, which I will link to in the doobly-doo. It reminded me of an essay from one of my favorite authors, Stephen R. Donaldson, who wrote a series called The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, The Unbeliever. And we'll talk about that more in Appendix N, because I have stolen scenes directly from it, and they were very effective. And if I did it, you can do it, so you'll get that for free. The series had a huge, colossal impact on me and about what fantasy should be about. Why? Right, when I decided I wanted to be a novelist, and I thought I could write fantasy, write science fiction, which should I write? I had to spend time thinking about what's the purpose of writing science fiction over fantasy. Why would you choose one over the other? And I decided that I agreed with Stephen R. Donaldson that he wrote a series that was ethical. It was about ethics in a way that The Lord of the Rings is merely moral. The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant is about morality. And I read a very interesting essay by Stephen R. Donaldson, which is the point of this video. He said that he felt, it was his belief, and he could be considered an expert, that the difference between fantasy and mainstream fiction is that in fantasy, The world is a manifestation of the character's internal conflict. Now, that is certainly true in the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. It is certainly true in my novels. It is certainly true in Priest. The forest that Hayden enters that makes up the bulk of the story is a psychological landscape. The things that happen in it are uniquely tailored to what's happening inside Hayden's head. And I believe that is true of Matt Mercer's world. I believe that the story, at least not the world, maybe the story that he's telling is an externalization of the internal conflicts of the characters in the cast. In other words, they fight Thordak the Cinderlord. He is the character that killed Vax and Vex's mother. They end up dealing with and solving Grog's conflict with his uncle and the herd. They end up solving Percy's conflict with that great character whose name I cannot off the top of my head remember. So Matt Mercer's running, again, so I noticed not only does it's somewhat obvious to say he's mining his characters' backstories to create conflict, but what is the purpose of that? It's to create a plot, to create a story, to create a campaign where the story is a manifestation of the character's internal conflict. The things that are happening inside their head become represented in the world and become like Thordak becomes not only literally the thing that killed Vax and Vex's parents, Thordak is also a metaphor for something that happened in their lives. Thordak is a metaphor for their relationship. Whereas in my campaign, and Stephen R. Donaldson says the difference between fantasy and mainstream fiction is that in mainstream fiction, the characters are a manifestation of the world. The author has something to say about the nature of the world, and they create a character that represents that so that they can make their point. And as a result, I mean, I think that is accurate. That represents also my attitude toward fantasy. Obviously, fantasy can cover a wide variety of topics and approaches and attitudes, but having read and been hugely influenced by Donaldson's writing, I basically agree with him. Whereas in my game, I have a plot already established that I've worked on. I know what's going to happen. It's often, although not always, based on some adventure or collection of adventures that I've strung together. And my attitude is, this is the world. This is the central conflict. These are the major players. This is the bad guy. These are the things that are going to happen if the heroes don't interfere. And then I just sit back and watch it play out. I am not building a series of adventures to give the players opportunities to work out their backstories. Often my players write elaborate backstories. I don't always read the whole thing immediately. I've got a game to run, is my attitude, and I hope that doesn't seem disrespectful. But I will dip into the players' backstories over the first couple sessions and read them slowly over time and start mining them for ideas. But typically, if my players find that something in their backstory has become relevant to the story that they're dealing with at that moment, from my point of view, it's because it was sort of an attack of opportunity. I saw an opportunity and I took it. For instance, in the adventure that I'm going to be running on Thursday night while the players go to the city of the Glass Pool, the Koatoa city that's been taken over by Illithid, there is going to be an opportunity in that adventure for the villain of the piece to capitalize on something that is in one of the players' backstories. The player in question, who shall remain nameless in case they watch this video, the player in question has almost certainly forgotten about this element of their backstory, and so when I deploy it, it will be a surprise, and I think it will be devastating. I think it's going to be one of those moments where the party is in mortal danger. A TPK is on the table. However, I have thought that many times and been surprised by my players every time, so we'll see. We'll find out. Stay tuned for the campaign diary. The player will be surprised, and it will seem like something that I've been building up to for a long time, but really it was just something I thought of the week before. I hadn't been planning this for a long time. My plot is my plot. My world is the world, and it is going to play out the way it's going to play out. I leave the burden to the characters, to the players, to figure out how are you going to interface with this. And I am happiest when my players see the things in the world and decide to pick a side, to decide that I want to work for those guys. I want to be that person's ally. I want to restore this person to the throne. I want to take this place over. I like it when my players impose themselves on the world and decide to change the world and affect the world. Whereas while I'm watching Critical Role, what I'm seeing is the world that they're experiencing is a manifestation of their backstories. The NPCs they meet, the conflicts that they're dealing with represent, and this is an oversimplification, there are elements of both in each. This whole thing started in my head only an hour or two ago as a suspicion, as a notion. I went back and reread that essay by Stephen R. Donaldson, and as the idea developed and I went from being suspicious to a vague belief, I started to think A, that I was onto something, and B, that it might be useful to you as a dungeon master to think, what kind of game are you going to run? Are you running a fantasy game where the world the players encounter will be a manifestation of their internal conflict? You mine their backstories, and not just their backstories, their characters, their personalities, and say the things and people you meet in the world will be metaphors for these things. If you have a lawful good paladin, they are going to encounter scenarios where law and goodness are not solutions to the problems that will challenge them directly and personally and psychologically. Whereas I run a game that is more about fiction. It's about the world. It's not about the characters. The characters they're going to be famous and they're going to do epic deeds and they may save the world, but it's because they impose themselves on the world. I think that's one of the reasons I use adventures, which is something that Matt Mercer doesn't do. It's something Jim Murphy doesn't do. It's something I'm one of the only dungeon masters I know that does it. My friend Jordy doesn't do it. He tends to roll his own. Most of the best DMs I know all roll their own. And in fact, I sometimes think talking to them, they're surprised that I don't. And now I feel like maybe I understand why. It's that I like the idea of setting up making the story about the fiction of the world. Maybe this is my own ego speaking. And certainly Matt Mercer is somebody that has a lot more. He's kind of famous for having a great deal of empathy for his players. And whereas I spend a lot of time building the world and the plot and the politics and the subplots, and that's maybe the reason my friend Phil, when he got dumped into my game, turned to my friend TJ and said, I feel like we just got dumped into the Game of Thrones and we don't have an appendix to look things up in. And that, for him, that was a neat feeling. But that was him reacting to the reality, the feeling of the objective reality of the world. There was no concession in the world he was experiencing to the characters and their backstory. And that was what they were discovering, was it was up to them to figure out, how do we fit in here? How do we slot in here? Whereas I feel like the Vox Machina can sort of count on wherever they go, they are going to discover that what they find reflects themselves. If you want to run a game like Vox Machina, if you want to run a Critical Role style game, then I think it's important to really know your players for one thing, but also read all their backstories and think about how to take the central tension of the character. What's going on in their head? What do they fear? What do they hope for? What do they want to achieve? And then try to represent that in the world with enemies and allies. If you want to run a game like mine, you spend your time thinking about the politics of the world and who in the world wants what. See, it's sort of the opposite. What do the characters want? What do the people in the world want? I think about, what do the people in the world want? How are they going to go about getting it? What happens if they succeed? What happens if the villain succeeds in his plan? And I then leave it to the players to invent and create and be the John McClane, throwing themselves into the... See, now John McClane's reality is not a reflection of his own internal psychology, as opposed to a character like Lawrence from Lawrence of Arabia, where the world he encounters definitely is a realization of his internal psychology. So I think, or absence thereof. So I think these are two, I don't know, I just came up with this idea a little while ago. I thought I'd make a video about it in lieu of, I apologize, in lieu of a 40-minute long video. We'd have a much shorter video with many fewer edits on a new idea, untested, merely talked about. So I will not be surprised if there are a million comments saying, you're an idiot, you just made this thing up and imposed it on these two games and there's no basis in reality. But I do often, because I've been watching a lot of Critical Role, this is on my mind, and I sometimes envy the game that I'm watching, and I'm like, wow, these characters, there's a lot of emotional depth to what's happening in Critical Role that is lacking in my game. But my game has a lot of verisimilitude and politics, and the players feel as though their actions have enormous weight, their decisions have enormous weight. I was in the lunchroom at Turtle Rock Studios, and somebody who's not in my game was talking to somebody else in my game about their perception of what goes on in Dungeons and Dragons, and this player in my game had to explain, you don't understand, everything that's happened in Matt Colville's game has happened because of stuff we did in the first 4 hours of play. Matt had no idea that we were going to leave the tavern after it had been attacked by skeletons, and there was a mysterious fog outside. We were all almost dead and should have stayed inside and rested, which is what I thought they were going to do. But instead, they decided to go out into the city in the middle of the night, covered in supernatural fog, investigate what was happening, risk their lives, and that's when they discovered the half-orc agent of Lady Serial, who had found and recovered Arcturus, the Sword of Stars, and the Shield of Andrim, and was in the process of making off with them. And my idea was that they were going to rest in the inn after the battle. When they woke up in the morning, they would find these items missing. They would find the stained glass window in which these two items were hidden had been broken, and they would realize they would connect two and two and go, oh my god, the sword and the shield we saw depicted in the stained glass were real and hidden in there, and now this half-orc, and therefore Lady Serial, have these items, but instead, Nicodemus got them, and now Nicodemus is the Count of Rend. He's carrying this symbol. The whole plot line of the Baron of Bedegar came out of this. The Black Rose have become their kind of like hereditary enemies now. They're the recurring villains of the piece, all because of the players and the decisions they made in that first adventure. And it was a mind-blowing experience for this other person at the table to go, oh my, I had no idea that's what D&D was. And it's like, well, that's only one thing D&D can be. I trust that if you as a player give me this cool hook in your backstory, I'll go, oh, that's a neat idea, and I'll just file away in the back of my head. I make no plans really to follow up on it or to extract value from it. But what I do know, what I trust, is that as I am running the game in the weeks and months to come, and it may be months, that an opportunity will present itself. And I have to, that's the training. This is something I'm not sure you can teach, but it is definitely a muscle that you can learn to exercise, that I have to stay open and to the possibility that crazy stuff's going to happen, and just trust that some opportunity will present itself, and it's my job to recognize it and go, aha, this is an opportunity for me to take this person's backstory and plug it into the world, and if I do it well, if I do it right, the player will not notice that this wasn't something I had been planning for weeks. And I think that's one of the reasons, if you're watching my game, if you watch the stream that we did, it will seem as though there's lots of hooks into characters' backstories, and there's a lot of stuff going on that might seem on the surface similar to any other game or similar to Matt Mercer's game. But me, the person behind the screen, I'm like, no, all of that is smoke and mirrors. Of course, Matt Mercer might feel exactly the same way. He might say, Matt, I'm running exactly the same game you're running. What are you talking about? But that's the difference between us. That dude has a show that I watch, and I do not have a show for anybody to watch right now. Although, who knows, Jerry and I are spending a lot of time these days talking about starting up the stream again and solving the problems that we were having before, and just trying to make the experience of watching D&D live rewarding and fun in and of itself, rather than as something that feels like it's tacked onto this existing Twitch technology. That's the video, folks. That's the whole thing. That was largely, it may have seemed like me rambling, largely a test. Difficult to find time these days with my schedule, with the house under construction, to record the videos I want to record. So instead we talked about the difference between a game that's more like a fantasy, where the world reflects the characters, and a game that's more like fiction, where it's up to the characters to impose themselves on the world. What do you think? Does that make any sense? Is that a useful way of thinking about different campaigns? You tell me. What kind of game are you running? Next video will be the campaign diary. If you are interested in seeing more streaming D&D for us, please come by my Amazon page and try buying my novels, because that money goes to buying the gear we need to make a live stream production ready, as far as I'm concerned. Until next time, thanks for watching. Peace out.